In October of 1942, a B-17 bomber carrying America's most famous living war hero ran low on fuel over the empty Pacific. It was searching for an island it could not find. Then it went down into open water, and for weeks the world did not know if the man aboard was alive or dead. His name was Rickenbacker. A generation earlier, in the skies over France, he had become the greatest American fighter ace of the First World War. 26 victories, the Medal of Honor, the most decorated pilot his country had. By 1942, he was past 50, a civilian, the head of an airline. But the nation was at war again, and Rickenbacker could not stay on the ground. The Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, asked him to cross the Pacific on a confidential mission. He was to inspect American air bases and to carry a private message, spoken aloud and never written down, to General Douglas MacArthur. On the 21st of October, he and 7 other men lifted off from Hawaii aboard a B-17 Flying Fortress, bound for a speck of coral called Canton Island. Among them was his old friend, Colonel Hans Adamson, and the pilot, Captain William Cherry. Somewhere over that vast ocean, the navigation failed. The instrument that fixed their position had drifted out of true. They flew on toward where the island should have been, and found only water in every direction. They circled, they searched. The fuel gauges fell. There was no land, no radio beacon, nothing but the curve of the sea. And then the engines began to die. Captain Cherry brought the heavy bomber down onto the swells, a controlled crash into open ocean. The impact was brutal, but the aircraft held together long enough. 8 men climbed out as it sank beneath them. They had 3 small rubber rafts, the largest no bigger than a bathtub. They lashed them together with line. They had no fresh water. For food, they had 4 oranges. That was all that stood between 8 men and the entire Pacific. The rafts sat low in the water. The men sat soaked to the waist, knees folded against knees. The sun came up like a furnace, and the salt began its slow work, opening sores on skin that never dried. Sharks came. They were not a fear or a story. They were real, 6 and 8 feet long, bumping the thin rubber from below, brushing past the men's legs in the dark water. There was nothing to do but sit still and wait for them to lose interest. Rickenbacker, the oldest among them, took command without anyone asking him to. He rationed the 4 oranges into slivers. 1 small bite passed around the rafts, then nothing for another day, until the last peel was gone. He understood something the younger men did not yet know. Despair kills faster than hunger. So he drove them. He mocked them, argued with them, dared them to give up so that he could outlive them. He made them angry, because angry men keep breathing. In the evenings, when the heat broke, they read aloud from a small, water-swollen testament that one of the sergeants carried. 8 starving men, adrift on the open sea, holding a quiet service at dusk. The days blurred together. No rain, no land, no aircraft overhead. Their tongues swelled. Their minds began to wander. Some reached for the seawater, which is a slow kind of suicide, and had to be stopped by the others. Back home, the Navy and the Army Air Forces were searching a stretch of ocean the size of a continent. The newspapers had already carried the words, Rickenbacker, missing in the Pacific. In quiet offices, men began drafting his obituary. On about the 8th day, with the men near the end of their strength, something settled out of the empty sky and landed on Rickenbacker's head. A seagull, hundreds of miles from any shore. A single bird, come to rest on a dying man. He did not move. He raised his hand slowly, slowly, and closed it around the bird. They divided it among themselves, every part, eaten raw, and the small intestines they saved and threaded onto fishhooks. With that bait they caught a mackerel and a small sea bass. It was almost nothing, spread across so many men, but it was the first food in days. And it was more than food. It was proof that the sea might give again. Then the rain came, a gray squall on the horizon, sweeping toward them across the water. They caught it in their shirts and in the folds of the rafts, wringing it into their mouths, hoarding what little they could save. But the sea takes as well as gives. The youngest of them, Sergeant Alexander Kaczmarczyk, had been burned and weakened before the ditching. Day by day he faded, until one night he slipped away. They said the words they could remember and gave him to the ocean. To widen the chance that a search plane might see them, they made a hard decision. They untied the rafts and let them drift apart. 3 small specks now, spreading across the water, each man more alone than before. Rickenbacker held them together across the widening gaps by sheer voice and will, calling out, refusing to let any man sleep into death, promising a rescue he had no way on earth to promise. And rescue by then was looking for them. Navy patrol planes flew long search legs out of distant island bases, day after day, scanning a glittering emptiness for something the size of a raft. After more than 2 weeks adrift, a Navy pilot finally saw it. A glint, a shape that did not belong to the sea. One raft, and then, as the search tightened around them, the others. They were pulled from the water near the Ellis Islands by Navy float planes and patrol boats. 24 days after the bomber went down, Eddie Rickenbacker was lifted out of the Pacific, alive. He had lost some 50 pounds. His skin was burned and cracked, his body wasted to bone. But his mind was clear, and the first thing he asked was whether the rest of his men had been found. 7 of the 8 had come through. Only the young sergeant was lost. Out of 3 tiny rafts and 3 weeks of open ocean, 7 men were carried back into the world. And Rickenbacker, half-starved, was still not finished. He recovered enough to complete the mission he had been sent to do. He reached General MacArthur and delivered the message he had carried in his head across the entire Pacific. The story ran in every newspaper that had been preparing his death notice. He wrote of it later in a book, and he did not call it The Man Who Survived. He called it simply 7 Came Through. He lived another 3 decades and died in 1973, an old man in his own bed. The ace who had cheated death in the skies of one war and on the waters of another. He had no special claim on survival. He was past 50, unarmed against the sea, with 4 oranges and a bird that fell out of an empty sky. What he had was a refusal to lie down, and it was enough to carry 7 men home. That is the whole of it. That is everything.